Most of us have heard of the term blanching, which means to change color in the food from, say, a darker color to a creamy or a white color. Well, according to the California Asparagus Commission and some research stations in Arkansas, we can blanch asparagus right here in the field. So after we read about it, we decided we'd try to do that. Now, the way you go about it is you try to put a protective covering over the asparagus before it ever starts to emerge from the ground, and you want your covering to be a dark color. Well, Alan came up with one of our cold frames, and we just covered it with black plastic to keep it up off the ground. Now, with our windy conditions, we've had to kind of attach them to some of our rebar so they won't blow off, because any sunlight would ruin the experiment. And what we've done is we covered up the bed again with the plastic, and the whole purpose is to try to block the sunlight from the spears as they emerge. And what we're doing then is stopping the photosynthesis process so we don't get any green pigment in the asparagus spears as they come up. And we've got one that's starting to emerge right now, and what we've done, we've mulched with the area with cottonseed hulls to block out some of the weed competition. And really, you might ask, well, why would someone want to blanch asparagus spears? Well, in some markets, it's very much a commodity. But basically, what we're doing is, according to the research, they're showing us that we can actually get earlier production. Now, this year, the soil temperature has been so cool and wet, the asparagus is a little bit late in emerging. But in addition to getting a little bit earlier production, we heat it up somewhat. We also are stopping any of the phenolic compounds developing that are in accordance with the photosynthesis process. Or in other words, in some cultivars, the taste isn't quite as bitter. Also, they tell us that they're a little bit more tender too, even though they still have the same amount of fiber. Now, the key to it is once you come out and you start seeing emergence, and you'd want to check from time to time, you need to make sure that you harvest them and get them inside out of the light within 15 minutes, or they'll start to turn a pale green color when you get sunlight exposed to them. Now, when we harvest asparagus spears, usually you just want to snap them off at the ground level. And again, you can see it's a whitish color with a little bit of purplish cast to it. Or you can cut them with a knife at the ground level. Now, also with asparagus, they're very perishable if you harvest them in the hot part of the day. So usually it's recommended to harvest them when they're about 6 inches tall, again in early morning, and try to get them inside into cool temperatures or a cold water bath as soon as possible. Now, one thing that you want to do when the spears start emerging, now this is obviously on a mature bed that we can harvest. You want to harvest everything. If you start getting any little spears that are real small, say 1/4 inch or smaller, don't let those turn into ferns yet. At least harvest things for about 6 weeks, again in a mature bed. That way you'll get plenty of growth, and just cut the small stuff out, because once you start letting them turn into ferns, that is when they'll shut down their production and it starts putting food to the crown for next year's harvest. So again, that may be anywhere for 6 weeks, or when you start getting spears that are, say, a 1/2 inch in diameter or smaller. Now, the other thing that we're hoping that with a plastic covering like this, we might be able to prevent some of the asparagus beetles from coming in a little bit earlier, although we know that one life cycle of the asparagus beetle actually will emerge from the soil. So we also need to be careful. We may trap them in there if they emerge from the soil. But remember, the asparagus beetle kind of has a shiny cast to its back, dark color, and they lay eggs that are attached that are black color that kind of stand at attention from the asparagus spear. And the adult will actually chew on the spear and cause it to be misshapen, especially if you're going to sell any kind of asparagus spears. It will affect the sell and marketability. If you're doing it in a home situation, you can trim some of those areas off and still eat them, but again, appearance is what's affected. As the maturity goes on with the asparagus, they will also feed on the ferns, and later on you can live with a few of the beetles, but initially that's where the problem is. Now, there's several ways to control the asparagus beetle. One way would be to attract more beneficial insects into the garden, such as parasitic wasp and lady beetles. Or, of course, there are some organic type sprays such as pyrethrin, rotenone, or ryanea, which are organic controls that you could spray on or dust on. And then, of course, there are more synthetic types like malathion and 7. But hopefully, again, you'll keep an eye on them and you can harvest them, hand pick them, because once those eggs are on there, they're almost impossible to wash off and control, so you can keep them clean during earlier production. But in the meantime, with the late season and harvest, we're going to cover ours back up, and hopefully we'll get some more blanched, and then we'll try them and see how that comes along, and we'll let you know to see if they really are more tasty.